Hello. Oh, there I am. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. We've got an interesting lecture today. I'm so enjoying doing the work for this series. We're going to be talking about the women that literally designed America. Not surprising, right? It was women doing it. We already kind of knew that, I think, but now we have evidence of it. We're going to talk about Florence Shue Knoll and Ray Kaiser Eames, um, and their contribution to America. Before we get rolling in that, I want to do a bit of a rehash of what we learned last week for those that weren't here, or those that need a little bit of a prompting reminder. We talked about Leonora Carrington and Remedios Varo. How many of you was it the first time you'd ever even heard of these artists? Yeah, right. I know they're so interesting. It's so funny because I just now that particularly Leonora, now that she's like on your radar, I think you're going to see images of her as crop up. I know that has happened to me. Remedios Varo is, I think, more famous in Mexico, but more and more, she is creeping her way into American consciousness. Two very interesting women, very much connected to the surrealist art movement, right? We talked about that last time, and also their extraordinary biography. We looked at Leonora Carrington, who, was from basically almost an aristocratic family, and fell into a kind of the surrealist milieu in Paris after she met Max Ernst in London in art school. And she does this work about that time. And it's a work that's very much indebted to surrealism. We see her here as a self portrait, these kind of investigations into oneself and kind of layers of consciousness is certainly part of that, as is kind of animal imagery that we see her here. She takes on, we learned, her kind of totemic form as like the horse that appears over and over. And then she includes this bizarre creature, right? The hyena, a nursing hyena, kind of an animal associated with obviously sexuality, but also female empowerment. And we see her there with that incredible hair, kind of looking outward, and the way that we see this kind of fusion of these elements, in the shadow under her feet, as she's really kind of coming to terms with her own independence in the face of this kind of overwhelmingly intrusive family that kind of dominated her life, and really the chutzpah it took for her to, forego those influences. We also looked at the early work of Remedios Varo as well. She came from a more middle class upbringing in Madrid, where she went to the most prestigious art school in the country and did well and got the prestigious degree. And then she fell in with the kind of radical lefty surrealist group in Barcelona, where she was doing kind of the Icky corpse style works, where she would kind of use elements that she would kind of cut out from magazines, kind of experiment with collaging to create works like the anatomy lesson that don't really congeal together but kind of evoke kind of strange associations. We get this kind of biomorphic mass in the foreground with eyes looking at us. She was an incredible drafts person. Remember, her father was a hydraulic engineer and had her copy his blueprints and would make her do them over and over again until she got them exactly correct. So she had this, kind of extraordinary confidence in our drawing skills, and we kind of see that on display in these figures here. But altogether, there's no kind of clear meaning to her work. That also is the case here in Souvenir of a Valkyrie, kind of just an evocation of female body, right? A corset there with kind of heads in an ocean in this kind of amorphic space with kind of vines, organic elements growing out of it. are we dealing here with veils of consciousness? You know, this is very much part of the surrealist style, is to be almost cryptic and veiled and uh, you know, this is what is embraced: the irrational, the the automatic chance, that type of thing. Remedios Varo becomes very embroiled in politics around the Spanish Civil War. She is in Paris for a short while, but because she is associated or is pinned as a radical, she is kind of forced to leave Europe quickly. And so she takes a direct ship to Mexico, where that is where we see her next. Leonora takes a more circuitous road, right? By falling first madly in love with Max Ernst, who is that. Have you ever played that game? You know, how many steps away you are from that actor? Kevin Bacon. Have you ever played this game? Like every movie has him, like everyone you can identify. But I feel like our class is 7 steps away from Max Ernst. He's like in the middle of everything. This guy is everywhere, including he is going to steal Leonora Carrington's vulnerable 20-year-old heart, and they're going to live together in this summer of love, right? A blissful summer out in Provence in a farm where they're going to be madly in love and doing all sorts of crazy things. Building sculpture, working her. She does this work kind of devoted to him, very much exemplifies her surrealist chops, right? There he is. Remember, his alter ego is Lop Lop, the bird king, and there he is looking very weird in that. Looks almost like a kiwi cape that the Maoris wore, with this weird fishtail. We see his bird leg, his weird beak, and there she is in the background in an ice scape. This blissful time together comes to a crashing end when Max Ernst is interned as a German national in France, and she's left to wander alone in their shared, you know, love farm, where she kind of goes down the psychological black hole and is scooped up by friends, taken to Spain, where she is then in her family called incarcerates her in a sanitarium in Spain, which is a very, very dark time for her. So much so that she never really wants to see him again. And he remained in love with her, tried to see her again in Lisbon. She escapes from her captors at the sanitarium, runs to the Mexican embassy. Her friend is working there, takes pity on her, marries her to get her the visa or to get her away from her family. And then they come to New York, where she, for a short time, connects with Peggy Guggenheim and that group at the Art of the Century. And then she wings her way onto Mexico, to Mexico City, where she becomes almost not next door neighbors, but down the street neighbors from Remedios Varo. And there, these two very unusual, very strong artistic minds are going to kind of come together, create a friendship that's going to be sustaining for both of them. This great, this is flickering in and out, which I don't like. It keeps doing it. I'm going to go and get a batteries. So complain loudly if I flicker, okay? Remedios does Catwoman, and here we have Carrington, The Pleasures of Dagobert. Both of the women become deeply interested in occult. Alchemy is another shared interest. Goddess, history of goddesses. Carrington, particularly with her Irish mother, becomes very interested in Celtic mythology, where we see the pleasures of Dagobert, kind of creating these really alternative worlds, where she kind of renders kind of fantastical scenarios crowded together in this strange composition that reads almost like a dreamscape. Similarly, Catman, Varro is always depicted with cats, so she was a cat lady. Is it getting to be too annoying? Okay. Chris, this is really flickering already, which is annoying to me. So if you could watch it and maybe we could get a battery ready for the break. And then we have here these kind of human-like eyes. Varro is kind of becomes very interested in alchemy, mechanical contraptions. We see her here, self-portraits, herself kind of as a female creator is a theme that these women treat with regularity. We see here the kind of owl, the bird of creation, who is creating a bird through this light with her own hand. You can see the alembic, we learned this word. This is the distillation, the distiller. I didn't realize that alchemy was all about distillation. A distiller that is taking the moon stardust and distilling it into pigment that is creating these birds that are coming to life around her. The power of female creative energy. Similarly, Varro takes us to the river that she actually had visited, the Orinoco River. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Where we see this kind of weird contraption that she creates, and she goes to the source of the river, and there she sees it's this, magical goblet spewing the waters. Very interesting and strange. Dissonance of different elements that don't really kind of congeal together. Leonora Carrington, here she is at work in her studio. She has this rambling house in Mexico City where she works, but her studio where she actually does her painting is, dark with a hard little chair, no place to sit, very uncomfortable. And that is where she creates works like The Temptation of St. Anthony that she does as she gets more and more interested in the lives of saints. Remember, both of these women had Catholic educations. They both bristled at the rules. Carrington particularly, and she finds herself kind of fascinated with the magical lives of saints that kind of revisit her in midlife in a work like The Temptation of St. Anthony, who is being, tempted by women in the desert scape, a work that is very imaginative. We see this kind of source of the river as female bodies flow through it. He looks kind of female to me, honestly, in this strange cowl-necked outfit that he's got on. And then we talked about Carrington at the end of her life. She becomes widely celebrated throughout Mexico, as does Remedios Varo. She's recognized by Octavio Paz, celebrated. Similarly, Carrington actually comes to the United States for a while, where she is celebrated by feminist artists, and then she returns to Mexico, where she becomes like a Mexican national treasure. She does this large work at the Paseo de Reforma, a work that illustrates one of her favorite poems from Lewis Carroll, reminding us of Crookie Hall, her strange manse where she grew up as a child. So very interesting, really, really unique artists, both of these women. Okay, so now, without further ado, we're going to talk about two women that I'm sure you've heard of before, at least Ray Eames. I think everyone has heard of the Eames, particularly us as Californians, as Charles and Ray Eames had such a huge impact here in California. I am not surprised at all to learn that women stand at the core of American aesthetics, and I hope that you aren't either after taking this class for a while. And that is the case, and I am showing you two of these women who represent this. Florence Schust Knoll, aka Schu, and Ray Kaiser Eames, both are going to have a profound impact on American interior design on the modern era, and really have contributed to the way that America looks today. Both were very successful furniture designers working within a modernist vocabulary whose businesses were employed by the corporate titans. Born 5 years apart, Ray was born in 1912 and was 5 years older than Florence Schust Knoll. And these women basically created the Mad Men era aesthetic while they were in their 30s and 40s. Their life story, however, reminds us of the challenges that women face, really, even into our own era. Both women were partners with their husbands in the design business. Florence Knoll gained wide recognition for her work. She received the first Industrial Design Award from the American Institute of Architects. The case of Ray Eames is particularly difficult to clearly define because her work is so enmeshed with that of her dynamic husband, Charles Eames, who served as the figurehead and spokesman of their jointly owned company. Only in recent years has her contribution been widely recognized and understood as on an even par with that of her husband. And I guess this shouldn't really surprise us because this has been going on forever. And I couldn't help but think, as I'm thinking about this, the first time I can really put a clear example of this, we have to go back to our trip to Bruges, and perhaps one of my favorite artists of all times, Jan van Eyck, the great 15th century Flemish Northern Renaissance master. As we learned when we went to Bruges, his wife actually carried on working her working out of and producing works by Jan van Eyck a decade after he died, which makes me think, how involved was she during his lifetime? Right? And this is an artist who was like accredited with being the first artist to ever use oil painting, like a major breakthrough artist, kind of extraordinary. Just something that kind of struck me as I was thinking about Charles and Ray Eames and the kind of integrated dynamics. And maybe the theme, like behind every great man is a great woman, takes on new meaning when you think that where does one contribution stop and the other begin? Okay, so Florence Schust was born in 1917, and this is her here. To a very well-off family that ran a successful baking business. Started by her Swiss-German grandfather, and the family sold it to a national corporation. Her parents died suddenly when she was a child, and Florence inherited a good amount of money at that time. Her guardian and executor, a family friend, decided to send her to Kingswood, a girls' boarding school which was part of Cranbrook, a wonderful art school that we visited in Bloomington Hills outside of Detroit in Michigan. And those of you that know me know this is like a Shangri-La for me. And this is even furthered by today's lecture. Cranbrook was founded by George Booth and his wife, Ellen Scripps Booth, in the 1920s. And forgive me if I digress here, but I really love this place. They bought a property in Bloomington Hills and transformed it into an education community that was meant to foster personal development, spiritual growth, and social engagement. The Booths were great admirers of the arts and crafts movement and aimed at banishing tasteless, mass-produced goods from American homes. A worthy goal. Cranbrook consisted of a large Cranbrook house that we visited, and here it is. This is where the Booths actually lived. It also consisted of other institutions. It's a huge campus, including a museum that is there. It also consists of a girls' school. It consists of a boys' school. It consists of the art academy, where the kind of graduate program took place as well. That was the Cranbrook Academy of Arts, and there's also an Institute of Science as well. In the mid-1920s, the Booths met the Finnish immigrant architect Eliel Saarinen and his family. Not unlike Joseph and Annie Alpers at Black Mountain College, the Booths invited the Saranins to come to Cranbrook to live and work. Eliel was asked to become the president of the Art Academy. He was also asked to design several of the buildings there on the campus grounds. His wife Loja, who was a fabulous textile artist, was asked to head the weaving workshop. And under the Saranins' care, Cranbrook became, a world-class art institute. And they ran it like a community, like kind of a big family, not unlike Black Mountain College, with the key difference being that Cranbrook was very well endowed by the Booth family. So no one had to like make their own dinner and that type of carry on like we saw at Black Mountain College. Now, a young Shu, as an orphan at the girls' school, came under the wing of the Saranin family. They basically befriended her and took her in as one of their own. So, at holidays, she would come with them because she had no family to return to. And so the Saranin family played this crucial role in nurturing and guiding her during her teenage years. She joined the family every year when they went to Finland for the summer. She palled around with the Saarinen children. She was friends with their daughter Pepison, but particularly their son Eero Saarinen, who was the youngest child of the family and was 7 years older than she was. So he acted really like a big brother to her. And this is a kind of a dynamic that will last throughout their entire life. And there is mature Eero and Florence Shu together. He would, critique her work in a very honest, open way, really cared for her, wanted her to do the best she could. Loja had secretly hoped that they would become a couple. You probably aren't surprised to learn they did hook up at one point, of course. But ultimately, Florence realized that if she was with Eero, she would kind of always live in his shadow, and she didn't really want that for herself. When little Shu arrived at Cranbrook, she was a resident at the Kingswood School for Girls, which Eliel designed in 1931. In fact, she was part of the second class of admittance to the school. And the school is absolutely beautiful and exemplifies Eliel's emphasis on simplicity and craftsmanship. He sought out very simple, honest materials that were durable. And like his arts and crafts brethren, he sought to do away with kind of over the top, nonsensical ornamentation. Think a Victorian mansion. Unlike the more severe modernists, Saarinen utilized ornamentation, but did it in a very simple way, but repeating it throughout his buildings in a very purposeful manner, believing that these kind of repetition of form would unify a building, and it completely works on me. And you can see it in its most kind of simple forms. These kind of three elements are picked up throughout every kind of vertical aspect of the school. And this is the school, for those of you that went to Detroit, we couldn't get into, that I loved and went crazy talking to you about. And I have to admit, I was talking to my dad about this before the class. I'm like, I'm talking about Cranbrook. And he was like, I don't know why you're so excited about that place. But it was amazing to me because I had this first tour, which was just like beyond great. And then it was kind of a bit of a cock up when we went. But anyways, here is another views of of Kingswood. So you can see once again, every element, every kind of vertical element has this kind of tripartite aspect. And then they're further kind of ornamented with this kind of square-like form. And we can see it here. And then we go inside, and we can see the interior of the school is kind of carried through different kind of ornamental elements are done here through the glass that are then picked up in the grills. We can see those Poabic tiles here. Um, uh, Everything is orchestrated. And what I didn't realize that this was completely a family effort. Eliel had his wife and children involved with the design process. His wife, Loja, designed all the carpets, all the tapestries. Here's another big tapestry at the refectory at the Kingswood Girls' School. He had his son, who was probably about 17, design all of the furniture. And there was about 30 different furniture pieces that he designed. His daughter, Pepperson, did all of the color tones throughout the school. So, so this was, basically where uh, Shu is going to go to school, and these are kind of the lessons that she kind of absorbed from the Saarinen family that kind of approached these projects in this kind of family manner, and were very collaborative in their kind of approach. And it's very much a Gesamtkunstwerk as well, this kind of complete work of art where they designed all elements of the school. Under Eliel Saarinen's watch, Cranbrook became a highly regarded design school. And he was very open to ideas, very encouraging of his students to experiment with various forms and materials and techniques. And here we see one of Shu's very first designs, done in 1930 when she's very young. This was done as part of an architecture study at the school. And when Eliel learned that she was interested in architecture, he kind of took her even further under his wing, and they, talked about all elements, as did Arrow, and, kind of really kind of brought her into the family fold. Also, that's what's happening on a micro level with Shu. Under Saarinen's care, Cranbrook basically was a kind of draw for the larger design world. Eliel emphasized workshop activities for his students where they would learn by doing. He believed that work was the key to a creative growth of mind, and that all good design was really based in careful research. At the time, Scandinavian architecture was becoming much more interesting to Americans in the United States. It was kind of an alternative to international style or traditional types of architecture. And Eliel was very, of course, versed in this from Finland. And he actively sought out other design professionals to come to Cranbrook to stimulate the students. So he was kind of recruiting all sorts of talented young designers through this period. And that included this interesting chap. This is Charles Eames. This hands-on approach of Eliel was especially interesting to Charles Eames, a young visiting scholar that Saarinen had offered a fellowship to come to Cranbrook in 1938. Charles Eames had already graduated from the University of Washington and had a degree in architecture at the time. He had even designed several houses, including this house here, the Meyer House from Huntley village in Missouri. And as you can see, it's a large brick house, quite classically conceived, but stripped down to its essential forms in a nod to Scandinavian modernism. Eames visited Cranbrook during this period that he was working on the Meyer House. He visited to liaise with Eliel Saarinen, who had reached out to him after seeing the work published in an architectural magazine. Eames then came and hired Cranbrook to produce some glass rugs and metalwork that he had designed for this home. And as a result of this collaboration, when Charles finished the project, Saarinen offered him a fellowship to come to Cranbrook. By that point, it was 1938, the depths of the Depression, and architectural commissions were few and far between. So Charles Eames, now age 30, who was married with a young daughter, took Saarinen up on the offer and worked at the school. Saarinen was so impressed with Charles Eames that he went on to appoint him as an instructor of design at the intermediate school. He also hired him to work on his big project of the moment, and that was the Kleinhans Music Hall, which is in Buffalo, New York, another site that we have visited. And during this period, Charles became very close with Eero Saarinen, Eliel's son, who was also helping him work on this project. Meanwhile, so we have Charles Eames happily working away as in the industrial design lab at Cranbrook. Meanwhile, another student arrives at Cranbrook in 1940, and this is Ray Kaiser, a very talented painter who had come to the school on the recommendation of a friend who had been a fellow pupil with her at the legendary painting academy run by Hans Hofmann. Now, we have looked at Hans Hofmann before when we discussed the art of Helen Frankenthaler. He was a very important catalyst in bringing abstract art to America in the 1930s. Ray met him when she was taking classes at the Art Student League in New York. And when Hofmann decided to leave the school and open his own private school, she went with him and then also attended his famous summer schools in Cape Cod. His instruction was based on formalism, or creating the illusion of three-dimensional depth while insisting on the flatness of the picture plane. And he was good friends with Robert Delaunay in Paris. He was really well versed in kind of French modernism and salon cubism. And we can see the impact of his work on one of Ray's very early paintings, an untitled work that looks like a salon cubist work, where we see here her using color alone and the overlapping of color to create the sense of three-dimensional depth. And this was something that artists of the beginning of the 20th century, Matisse, we've looked at him, were deeply involved in these experimentations. And here we have the young Ray similarly working on this. Also, through Hans Hofmann, she learns about the work of the Surrealist artists like Jean Arp. She learns about the work of Picasso, Juan Miró, Kandinsky. And he had several works by these artists for his students to study. So Ray Kaiser was really one of the few painters in America to be trained in European modernism in the 1930s. From this affiliation of Hans Hofmann's school, she's going to be very involved with the American Abstract Artists Group, which was, as you can see, predominantly women who were artist activists who fought for the right to exhibit non-representational art, basically picketing art galleries that refused to show their work, and advocated for the showing of modern artists. European artists like Jean Arp, Piet Mondrian, and the like. Of course, this is going to get more virulent during the war years because a lot of our American artists, like we learned, like Thomas Hart Benton, were very much in this modernist school before World War II. But as the war progressed, they left that behind, the kind of foreign style associated with Europe, to adopt American regionalism to prove their kind of American chops. And this is where we have, of course, like American Gothic and Americana emerging from that period. So Ray Eames is really, as a very young girl, very much, a part of this very avant-garde art world in painting in America. By the time she enrolled in Cranbrook, she was firmly committed to modernism and had been for several years, and was really, as I say, on the cutting edge of the latest developments in American painting. And this is really impressive because she came from, as one of my books that I was reading about her said, from Sacramento, California, a recognized backwater. So sorry for any of you that are from Sacramento. Um, not su- not surprising. She showed an early aptitude for art even as a young child. And in Sacramento, that backwater, she had a normal childhood. And then upon graduation, she decided to go to New York City. And her mother agreed to go, wouldn't let her go without her going as well. And so she enrolled at the Art Students League, which was an affordable place to, go to school at very cheap tuition. When she arrived at Cranbrook, she was enrolled in Loja's weaving program. And that was what her plan was at that point. However, she didn't last long at the weaving department. She spent most of her time in the design studio that was headed by Charles Eames. She quickly became entranced by the handsome industrial design instructor, and the two hit it off almost immediately. Charles, married at the time, actively pursued Ray, and they quickly fell in love. And almost at once, Charles initiated the divorce process for divorcing his current wife. That was really a very intense connection these two shared right away. While she is there visiting the design studio, all day, every day, Charles and Eero Saarinen were in the throes of designing furniture for the Museum of Modern Art's Organic Design in Home Furnishings competition. And they are going to win major prizes for the chairs that they designed. And here is the award winning designs. The two men had begun experimenting with molded plywood to get create this kind of organic chair, which they called organic chair. And here it is as it exists today. Basically, they couldn't get one singular piece of plywood to create a chair. That's what they were trying to do. They weren't able to achieve it, so they kind of compromised with this two-piece chair with this big kind of hole in the middle. Nonetheless, they sent it, and it won this competition. But remember these chairs, because this competition is going to be incredibly important and foundational for both Charles Eames and I want to say Ray is there at the studio during this whole process and was deeply involved in bringing these designs into being and then submitting them to the competition. And Eero Saarinen is influenced by this as well. Someone really wants to get a hold of you. We forgive you, don't worry. Shortly thereafter, Charles is able to free himself from his wife, and he is going to marry Ray Eames, basically within 1 month of getting the divorce paperwork. Ray had been at Cranbrook only 6 months at the time. Charles writes her perhaps one of the cutest proposal letters of all time. I am 34 almost years old, single again, and broke. I love you very much and would like to marry you very, very soon. Asterisk. Soon means very soon. What is the size of your finger? I cannot promise to support us very well, but if given the chance, we'll sure as hell try. Love, Charlie. Who could resist, right? So, yes, she says yes. And the couple decide to leave for Los Angeles. When they arrive, upon arrival, they rent a 2-room apartment on the west side, and they devote themselves to perfecting the molded plywood that eluded them when they were trying to do the organic furniture competition for MoMA at Cranbrook. They experimented for months and they come up with the Kazam machine, which I am showing you here, which is what they called, which used a high pressure system, which I should say was a bicycle pump that they would pump like this. They would put slats of plywood together, pump it up with glue in between them, compress this into a single mold, and able to create a single piece. Oh, there it is, plywood in a single piece. And it took them several months to do it, but they did this night and day together, completely collaboratively, until they achieved their desire, and they made this chair with their Kazam machine. The process took 6 hours to do, and then the glue set, the chair was achieved. So, boom, they have it. However, now World War II has broken out, and because of the war, they had to put the project on hold. And they decided to apply what they had learned to make wooden splints for the soldiers in the field. And they're going to sell 150,000 of these splints to the U.S. Army. And they're going to get financial backers. They're going to have, a financing. They're going to have a willing buyer of these splints. And with this, they're going to form their company, the Ply-Formed Wood Company. They're going to get the backers, and they're going to start working out the process of bringing these into production, which is going to mean, upscaling the Kazam machine into an actual industrial manufacturing machine. They're going to have to hire, consultants to help them with this, and they're going to turn it into an actual assembly line. So this is a huge time for them as they're kind of scrambling, and the splints are very effective and treasured items for the soldiers. Before this, they were using metal splints that were very painful, so much so that even the soldiers didn't want to use them, preferred just having a stick on their leg. So these were a welcomed change. So this was a big, big undertaking, and here they go. They actually hire, skilled craftspeople to help them do this, and they are, successfully, produce 150,000 of these. All the while this business is going, Ray took on a commission to design a series of covers for California, a new California magazine called Art and Architecture. The publisher had purchased the magazine in 1939 and had revamped it and wanted it to be kind of a point on a contemporary architecture mag, kind of bringing out contemporary trends. And he's going to hire Ray to do the covers, which of course would be very important for a design magazine like this. And so she produces a series of covers that we can see here, racing, to deal with deadlines. And you can imagine the difficulties of bringing a new kind of manufacturing process online. And she does this cover, which is, immediately recognized by the publisher as incredibly kind of important. And we can right away, if we think about what we've learned in terms of surrealism and what Peggy Guggenheim is doing with work by Jean Arp. I mean, we have here, kind of these organic forms that are very much in keeping with the kind of current ideas in European surrealist modernism, and creating this very avant-garde sensibility. He's going to go on and hire her to do 10 more of these covers. And this is something that she's doing completely separate from Charles. I think it's the only thing she ever does completely separate from him in her life. And they're so good. They're just a reminder of just how skilled she is and what she's bringing to the table. So back to production. It's not going to be until 1945, when the war is over, that they are going to be able to return to their design of a chair. And here is their chair. Of course, it's ubiquitous now. They wanted to produce a simple chair that was not upholstered and was also comfortable, that could be mass produced, and that mass production would be a positive influence on its function and design. Furthermore, they wanted it to be produced by people working in a dignified way. And they landed on this design that they had tweaked from their molding process. They did a 5-ply thickness of plywood that they would, place under pressure to create this chair that was then ready for mass production in 1946, which they did out of their Venice, California studio. They made 2 versions of the chair. They called them the DCW, the dining chair wood, and the LCW, the lounge chair wood, that is a little bit more reclined. And they were able to do these for relatively low amount of money. The couple then took 15 examples of their plywood chairs, and they kind of morphed their plywood wood company into a chair production company at this point. And one of their financial backers had set up for them a little showroom at the Barclay Hotel in New York in 1945. And they invited furniture people from New York to come and see these chairs. Ray Eames completely designs the entire space where the chairs are presented. And at this exhibition, George Nelson, the newly appointed design director for Herman Miller Furniture Company, sees the chairs and says, yes, let's go. And of course, they become a great partnership. It's also at this show that the chairs are tagged as designed by Charles Eames. It's also going to be at this show that they are going to talk to Elliot Noyes, who was the director of industrial design, the new director of industrial design at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, who knew the Eames from the splint manufacturing. And he is going to invite them to have a show at MoMA of their work. And he's going to be an incredibly important person for them, writing articles about their designs and hosting their work at the museum. And it's going to be at that show that the Eames chair tag is coined. And once again, Ray will completely do the interior design of that exhibition, or the exhibition design. And Charles, of course, is the front person there. And thus we get into the thorny territory of attribution when it comes to Charles and Ray Eames. Ray was at the center of the Eames production. However, she shied away from public appearances, an area that her husband excelled. This was also the 1940s, right? This was a man's world where the expectation would be that men would be in charge. Ray had a very strong feel for structure. She was a very extraordinary painter. She had a sense for color and form. She had great ability to design and arrange objects. She could style with the best of them and played a very critical role in building the Eames brand. In fact, she had designed the entire layout for the Barclay Hotel exhibition as well as the MoMA exhibition. And of course, she continued to design her kind of extraordinary magazine covers entirely dependent of Charles, which we can see here, very contemporary, kind of very contemporary, clear and clean, and, very much on point. So this was, someone that was also deeply involved in the design and the process manufacturing of the chairs. Okay. So let's float back to the young Florence Knoll. In the pre-war years, when the Eames were at Cranbrook, the Saarinen had encouraged their adopted daughter, Shu, now a high school graduate, to leave the campus and earn an architecture degree. In 1935, she moved to New York to attend Columbia University, where she did meet Le Corbusier. But ultimately, she decided she didn't like the school. So she returned back to Cranbrook for a while. And there she was a student there. She hung out under the protective wing of Loja and Eliel. She befriended many important people, including her co student Harry Bertoia, a design student who ultimately will go on and design the famous diamond chair for her later on. He is going to leave. He also will work for the Eames at one point, but he didn't like the way Charles didn't credit designers for their designs, and so he ultimately will leave. While she is with the Saarinen that summer in Finland, she met the world famous Finnish architect Alvar Aalto, who encouraged her to go to England and study in London at the School of Architecture there, which she then does do. But her education is cut short by the advent of the war. And so she is going to um, end up going to the Armor Institute in Chicago. And that, of course, is Mies van der Rohe's school, which will ultimately morph into the Illinois Tech Institute, Illinois Institute of Technology. Now, Mies van der Rohe, there he is, of course, had been the president of the Bauhaus in Berlin. He had broken into the world stage in 1925 when he designed the Barcelona Pavilion. And there it is, kind of the ultimate post and lentil architecture with this huge kind of cantilever overhanging eaves of a ceiling with this kind of glass walls around it, looking very Palm Springs to us today. But this is 1925, the first ever structure like this. And this was, incredibly influential. And you'll notice also the chairs there in the Barcelona Pavilion. So Mies van der Rohe, like many immigrants, came to the United States to escape the Nazis, and he set up his Armor Institute in Chicago. Now, thanks to Schuh's connection with the Saarinen family, Mies van der Rohe was particularly solicitous to this new student. Florence would meet Mies at his hotel where he lived, where he resided. He would have coffee and talk with him and hang out with him, and from him learned, important lessons about design, which were different than the Saarinens. Mies was very much kind of a steel and metal structure guy. And she picked that up from him, as well as many tips. I mean, who knows, if you're having, coffee on a regular basis with Mies van der Rohe, it's a great advantage. After graduation, she will go to New York, and once again, she will connect with the titans of modern architecture, all friends of Mies's and the Saarinens. She'll work for Walter Gropius, who was also a president of the Bauhaus, also Marcel Breuer, who was her boss for a short period of time there. Marcel Breuer designed his Kandinsky chair in 1925, which was his answer to a tubular version of a traditional overstuffed chair. And this, of course, is going to be an important piece of furniture that will later be produced by Florence. So while working at the various offices of these kind of world famous architects, Florence is going to meet Hans Knoll, a German immigrant who had just taken control of his family's furniture company and also did interior design commissions. Hans Knoll, as you can see him here and here, was cute, very dapper, elegant German man. He was also kind of a great entrepreneur, that he was there with his family business. And he hires the young Schuh, and together they kit out offices at the Pentagon. Hans Knoll also, however, could be rather impulsive, and he had agreed to a deal with Bloomingdale's to sell his furniture. The agreement resulted in a $50,000 loss for Knoll Furniture, which would be the equivalent of about $700,000 today. Florence, remember, had her own money, and she agreed to cover the loss with her inheritance, and as a result became the co-owner of the Hans G. Knoll Furniture Company. She stepped in as an equal, became the design director, and changed the name of the company to Knoll Associates. The long hours together at the office will ultimately lead to a love affair between Hans and Shu, and the two will fall in love and marry that year. And they will become the perfect partners in life and love, exemplified by the fact that they spent their honeymoon in Sweden making arrangements to have deals with the various Swedish furniture companies. And they would continue to work kind of tirelessly to make these deals. Shu knew, of course, that she had a stacked Rolodex. And indeed, as their business grew, the bulk of their orders is going to come from architects that knew her and specifically hired her for their new buildings. And in preparation for things to come, she is going to start the Knoll Planning Unit, which was aimed specifically at corporate offices. A key commission for Shu, associate the planning division, came right away in 1947. Eames, 1946, this was the same year that the Eames hook up with Herman Miller. Shu, now running the Knoll Planning Unit, was recommended to Nelson Rockefeller by a mutual friend to design his office. Shu designed a custom furniture, all made of beautiful, fine materials, but in a very modern, streamlined form. Nelson's only request was to keep an existing pen that he liked, but the pen well was made out of an unsightly plastic. So Shu had her friend Osamu Noguchi design and carve a cover for the ugly, offending inkwell, and then place this on his desk as this kind of a design-friendly solution. And then this is going to be a very important calling card from this point onward. She would go in to, meet with different, corporations, and as she's presenting her extremely modern plans, they're like, I don't know, this seems a little too modern for me. And she would say, well, it's not too modern for the Rockefellers. And then they, of course, would be like, okay, yeah, I guess this is okay. And then she would kind of hook clients that way. Okay, let's take our break now, and we'll have a little bit of chocolate and then get back going. Okay, we ready? Okay, so we're talking about Florence Knoll. She's humming along. She's got her new business cracking, and she's designed Nelson Rockefeller's office. Okay, so, and this is happening in 1947, okay? And during that year, that was the same year that the Eames chair was under production with the Herman Miller Company. Shu turned to her adopted brother, Eero Saarinen, and asked him to design a new chair for her company. She asked him to create something cozy, soft, and informal. Later, she recalled, I wanted a chair that was like a basket full of pillows, something I could curl up in. Saarinen rose to the challenge and created a chair that proved comfortable in a number of different positions. Originally named Number 70, it soon became known as the decidedly feminine womb chair because of its comfortable, organic appearance. As Saarinen later explained, it was designed on the theory that a great number of people have never really felt comfortable and secure since they left the womb. The womb chair was highly innovative from a structural perspective. Like Eames, who he had designed the organic chairs with in 1940, Saarinen wanted to construct something out of a single piece or cohesive shape, and achieve this by experimenting with a new material, fiberglass. The final result, a padded and upholstered fiberglass shell that sits on a polished polychrome steel frame, combined simplicity of shape and true comfort and flexibility. Of course, the desire to create a chair from a singular mold derived from that MoMA competition that he and Charles Eames had won and had been a catalyst for the Eames development of the Kazam machine. And the womb chair was ready for production in 1948. It wasn't exactly as Florence visualized. The chair was more squishy. It was not as squishy as she had liked. And very wisely, she called it a lounge chair, which was different than cushioned armchairs. And of course, it's no coincidence. There's Arrow in his womb chair. It's no coincidence that she turned to her, brother, basically, to help her kind of kickstart this important design for her new company. And Arrow and Shu will remain very close through their adulthood and had a true familiar relationship. And that's got to be one of the best birthday cakes of all time. That is, Shu made that birthday cake for Arrow for his birthday, the womb chair cake. Florence scored another coup in 1948 when she secured the production rights for the furniture designed by her old professor at architecture school, Mies van der Rohe. Knoll Associates began manufacturing the furniture in waves and then would kind of tweak it each time to make it better and better. The Barcelona chair, of course, is perhaps his best known piece of furniture. And of course, many of you probably might own one of these Knoll manufactured Barcelona chairs. And just a reminder, the Barcelona chair was designed for the Barcelona Pavilion in 1925. Interestingly, Mies caught wind of the fact that King Alfonso was coming to the World Expo, and he designed this chair with him in mind. So a king's chair, if you will. And then after these, one-offs for the 1925 show, very limited numbers of them were produced in the 1930s and 40s. And the very first Barcelona chair came to the United States by the architect Philip Johnson, who went to the 1925 Expo and saw the Barcelona Pavilion. But over time, of course, the Knolls made it more streamlined. Here is a kind of a contemporary photo, or more contemporary photo from the 90s from one of Knoll's, ads. And they also started to produce the Barcelona couch that you can see there, that they actually coined that term. It was one of the more expensive items to make and produce. Not to be outdone by anyone like the Herman Miller Furniture Company, Knoll Associates opened its own inaugural showroom in 1948 at 601 Madison Avenue in New York. The show brought Knoll to the full attention of the industry. Described in the press as unlike anything that had come before it, Knoll's new showroom was noted for its balance of openness and intimacy. Also, a use of bold color, texture, and easy glamour. And Florence uses these open weave cloths made out of panels of color, and she hangs them as kind of scrims from the wall. And what I'm showing you here is MoMA had a show of the inaugural, um, you know, showroom that they reproduced. So it's a little bit easier than looking at just black and white photos. What I really took away from this is the way that she used wrap cord in her showroom design. And I couldn't help but think of Frederick Kiesler's design for Art of the Century, remember, which was so radical that he used the same kind of cord to hold down various screens and elements within the room. And here we see, just a few years later, Florence has kind of picked this up and is integrating it into her design. And then she also went to go on and do, this is a later design, her big showroom in Chicago by 1953. This is designed by the Knoll Planning Unit she's kind of well on her way developing her style at this point, where she uses a lot of recessed lightings, very minimal architecture, recessed lighting to kind of highlight and spotlight specific groupings of furniture. She was also very texture and imports of fabrics was incredibly important to her. And these were kind of all also on display in this kind of open plan type showroom. Okay, so this is Florence in 1948. Let's shift back over to the Eames and see what they're doing. And no surprise, they're in full innovation mode during this period as well. They too were very quick to jump on the molded fiberglass train and produced a series of chairs designed between 1948 and 1950 as well. They designed La Chaise, a favorite chair that they loved, that you see here, was basically a stressed skin fiberglass shell and a hard rubber foam core. They loved this chair, but they never put it into mass production because it kept breaking and they couldn't get it really right. They realized that Gaston Lachaise's famous series of sculptures called the Floating Figure would just about fit into the chair Lachaise, and they loved this, and they thought it was hilarious. They did produce it in smaller numbers, but it's always been expensive. But I couldn't help but think of this chair that is from that 1940 MoMA competition that Eero Saarinen and Charles did together. And I'm throwing Ray into that as well. This chair here that kind of morphs into Eames here. And of course, as we'll see, Eero will basically kind of replicate this chair. And the Womb chair, right? All come from these kind of early designs. So while Lachaise never made it into wide-scale production and mass marketing, that was not the case with the other chairs that they were producing at the time. The Eames designed the LAR, or lounge armchair, and also the upright chair, which later will just become called plastic chair in 1948. The couple designed this chair for the International Competition in Low-Cost Furniture Design, once again organized by MoMA, with the aim of improving the production of low-cost furniture by bringing kind of high-end designers, not unlike what Target kind of has done in our own recent memory. The original chairs, interestingly, were made of printed sheet metal. They could have been produced for about $9 to $11, but when Herman Miller took this on, they contracted with Zenith Plastics that molded the seat with the material they called Zen Alloy, which was a fiberglass with polyester resin, which they added the color directly into the material. And so it's actual material. It wasn't something that they had to add color on top of. And so the original chairs came in colors, but only three. They came in greige, gray, and parchment. The colors, though, were added later. They did come in an array of bases, as you can see here, and you could choose which base you wanted. You could choose the rod-legged option or the wood leg option. Here also you can see this is the Eiffel Tower top. This is the wood and wire base. You could also get the low rod base. And they came in the armchair and just regular old plastic chair. And then over the years, they went into different different colors. For a short time, between 1968 and 1984, you could buy the rocking chair. I don't know if anyone has a rocking chair. And then they actually, even the plastic chair went through different kind of prototypes. They designed the stackable chair, which has been in schools across America forever. The desk chair was an Eames chair as well. And they always thought meta. They were, to their credit, they were always thinking and kind of had all sorts of kind of visions in mind. From a very early point, they were thinking about mass public seating, and you probably aren't surprised to learn that they thought about airport seating right away. They came up with a design to have, the plastic chair placed on cast aluminum rods for plastic seating like this. And then they also thought of greater airport seating, and there is their vision for that up here. And then they continued to think about this, and then they came up with the Eames tandem sling seating design seen in airports all over the world. And probably not surprising, it was their old friend Eero Saarinen, who was designing Dulles Airport in the 1960s, that asked them to come up with the seating, and they designed the slingback system of 10 seats made of black nalgahide between polished aluminum castings. And then Henry Miller tested and produced the chairs. They were installed in Dulles Airport and Chicago O'Hare in 1962, and then in airports across the world. Back to the Knowles. Besides being the era that gave birth to the ubiquitous plastic chair, the 1950s saw an explosion of the American office, and Florence's planning unit was at the core of it. As she later said about American office design, everything was so bad, it was easy to improve it. Under Florence Knoll, the character of the office changed. She transformed the boring, standardized office into one that will eventually be considered cool and sexy. Basically working as a design consultant to architects, simplifying the task of coordinating interiors with a total plan. One of her first major architectural clients was Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, or SOM, who hired her to do the interior of a new major project, the Connecticut General Life Insurance Building, which was an SOM designed building. And as you can see here, it's a really cool campus designed near Hartford, designed to accommodate 3,000 employees. Very modern. It had Osamu Noguchi designing the courtyards. The structure was very beautiful, and they hired Florence fairly early on in the process. And one of her lessons that she kind of learned from this is that she did these kind of early mock-ups early on in her process. And in doing so, her client was very impressed with this new, she was selling modernism as well. And they realized through her elaborate mock-up that they were able to save an incredible amount of floor space if they were to use her design, and also would give the whole office area a sense of spaciousness. And she was very clever in this and kind of selling her vision. She explained that just looking at blueprints for most does not work. So she would put in the work with her team in creating, pay stubs to give people a good sense of what they were doing and convince them that this was the way to go. And indeed, even the president of General Life Insurance, that was kind of on the fence for traditional, said, "Wow, you've already paid your fees just by saving all the square footage in this design." The result of Shu's design was beautiful. She operated under the idea that a good place to work means attractive recreational spaces, as well as efficient offices. She created well-organized, clean lines, smart interiors that created a right atmosphere for business success. And she also included kind of humanizing solutions for kind of the sterile elements of the office, understanding that majority of the workers for the life insurance company were young women. In order to humanize the office, she included inviting furniture that she basically designed herself. She named this chair and the little sofa and chair that we see here the Parallel Bar Collection, that was kind of loosely modeled on Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona chair. Whereby she created a very simplified leg structure, very straightforward and neutral. And she was also very particular about her upholstery technique, developing a patent way to create these very crisp, tailored looks to her pieces. And then she went on to kind of manufacture her own furniture as well. I mean, her own upholstery as well. And here is another example of this. She called such furniture the meat and potatoes of the office. And she really downplayed her contribution to designing these works. She saw them just really as fill-in pieces or architectural pieces is what the term that she used. And she was very clear to say that they were different than the sculptural pieces in the room. And this is the way she designed it. She designed the pieces as kind of her meat and potato or architectural pieces would kind of orient the viewer. Of course, that's my phone. Sorry, we'll just let it ring. Around how one should enter a room or exist within a room. And then she would hire designers to create the kind of sculptural pieces, she called them, that would be the focal point of a room, that would draw the eye. And here we see Arrow, her brother, designed his pedestal collection that she used widely in her offices as part of the kind of the sculptural element as key points within a room. Also, when she was working at the Connecticut General Life Insurance, she decided to kind of focus on the working areas. Obviously, the desk. These are the desks of the multitude of young women who work there in their supportive roles. And to kind of get it right, she interviewed them and asked them what they wanted. And from them, she learned that the kind of heavy furniture with the desks, that we all know that come all the way down to the ground, were kind of considered like dirt catchers, where people wouldn't really want to put their feet down there, that it was considered kind of dirty. And so she rose the desk up with these kind of small, kind of feminine, slender legs. And then she cleared the desktop off of all of the kind of cubbies and so forth, and made it a very streamlined workspace. And then she did very smart kind of filing areas within the desk. The young women workers were very pleased with the efficiency here within her new designs. Now, upon completion of the Hartford office, the Knoll Planning Unit was hired by the Columbia Broadcasting System, or CBS, to do their interior. And this was a more difficult project for Xu and her team because this was not a brand new modern building. This was an older building on Madison Avenue. And so there were many kind of awkward structural spaces. But this is what she said she really liked, the real challenge of how to create a streamlined environment within kind of a funky space. And here we can see in one of the reception rooms, I guess they were small, and this kind of oddball window, the way she uses these kind of sculptural chairs. These were designed by Eero Saarinen. These were called conference chairs, but they're very similar to what he was attempting to do in that 1940 competition. So she includes some of those along with some meat and potato couches. Xu's goal throughout was a sense of simplicity. She wanted to get a sense of kind of efficiency within the offices. She did this through recess lighting. She placed electrical switches at the door jamb, which I guess wasn't something that was done. She concealed telephone wires. Specialty equipment were kind of secreted away, creating a much more kind of efficient sensibility. And we actually have a photo of what the offices kind of looked like before she went in, as they looked in 1935. And there you can see, it looks like a boys' club for sure, right? Heavy furniture, a lot of leather. This is what she's kind of doing away with. And she uses kind of brighter tones in her upholstery, but she's also using acoustic, furniture that absorbs sound. That's another element that she's kind of very sensitive to, and something that was kind of new and innovative in her design strategy. Her kind of new design is very evident in the president's office. Here it is, the president of CBS. We can see Eero's chairs here featured. She had to solve a problem that is much more a problem of our own time. What to do with all the screens. And here, this is cutting edge technology for the time, which included a phonograph and 2 TVs. And she came up with the design of placing them in kind of a vertical element, all of the wires and everything hidden away within this one console. And then she kind of twins it with this kind of vertical, organic, tree-like form here. And this was considered very kind of, innovative and kind of wonderful. So this was, in a way, kind of a highlight for her because she's going to experience kind of a series of tragedies shortly thereafter. Right after finishing the CBS headquarters, tragedy fell when in 1955, Hans Knoll was killed in an automobile accident in Cuba, which was, distressing for her. At the time, or shortly thereafter, her brother, Eero Saarinen, was hired by CBS to build a new flagship headquarters for the broadcasting company. The building became known as Black Rock, and the goal was to create the simplest skyscraper in New York, made of dark materials. So one would kind of take in the whole structure in one kind of singular, look, if you will. Not surprising, Eero will hire Xu, who is now running not only the planning unit, but also the entirety of Knoll Associates on her own, and now to take on this huge project to do the entire interior layout of the CBS headquarters. It was kind of a dream come true and kind of a nightmare at the same time. So much was happening. She was able to kind of design the layout open planned as she wanted to do it. But at the same time, it became a nightmare when her brother Eero was diagnosed with a brain tumor, opted to have the surgery to remove it, and the surgery was unsuccessful, and he died in the operation. So Florence then had to step in then to further take over the unfinished project. And it was really the last major commercial design that she would do before retiring from Knoll Associates in 1965. And here is her work from that time. This is the presidential suite. We see these kind of very clean executive suites, and it was her idea to kind of shift all of the executive offices in one area, and then the whole kind of secretarial or admin and support offices into another. And so we have these very peaceful, huge rooms, very almost kind of rarefied areas. She used, kind of contemporary artworks here. She further kind of upgrades the parallel bar collection of sofas to create the Knoll Lounge collection, which are a little bit more luxurious as her fill-in pieces here. She used kind of earth tones throughout. She became very involved in the much kind of more lush curtains in these executive suites. She was able to went a little bit more fun with the vice president's offices, a little bit more dynamic, this playful use of red, black, and white. We can see this usual formula. Here's the lounge collection chairs with Saarinen's conference chairs around a table with a sculptural element. She's using kind of special pleats that she designs for the drapes. The smaller offices, of which there were many, were done here, as you can see, kind of in kind of white forms with little kind of punctuations of color. This is going to be the last project for Knoll Associates. It would have been an exhausting time for Shu, having lost her husband, her adoptive brother in such close succession, having the responsibility of such a large project, along with running the furniture manufacturing. But it was still a sting when her CBS headquarters were met with criticism. The architecture critic of the New York Times wrote, "The inside of CBS is a gold corporate cliche, a lavish cocoon, complete to standardized concealed wastebaskets and accredited almost as equally standardized abstract art." Perhaps Shu was a victim of her own success. Her brand had become too recognizable, too widespread. The smaller offices were dinged as well. One associate designer was incredulous that they were creating white cubicles looking across at other white cubicles. It boggled my mind that what we were creating, little white boxes. It was a shattering experience. In the midst of the project, Florence married Harry Hood Bassett, a wealthy banker. After she completed CBS, she sold Knoll Associates and completely stepped away by 1965. She continued to work as a private consultant for architectural firms and spent more of her time in Florida, where she lived to be 101, dying in 2019 after becoming the first woman to be awarded the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal for Industrial Design, and also winning a National Medal for the Arts, the highest honor for artistic achievement, which was presented to her by George Bush in 2003. So she went on to be, and she's been an incredibly influential woman, and there she is, an extraordinary career, basically designing the look of corporate America. And good on her for pulling out when she did. She deserved a rest. No, I don't think she had kids. That's my understanding. Charles had a daughter with another, with his first wife. So back to the Eames. I want to carry on with them. We have so we left Charles and Ray in 1950 with the mass production of their plastic chair. They went on to produce many other highly popular and influential pieces of furniture, classics, if you will, during the 1950s, of course, including the lounge chair. I already heard people saying, "Oh, I have one of those." Yes, this is a ubiquitous chair. This was actually a chair they had begun experimenting on in 1945 when they were doing their molded plywood. The chair is different than the other Eames chairs because they weren't focusing so much on the low end of the market. This was, a work that required some more advanced technology and hand labor and craftsmanship, so it's more expensive. And the original was made of rosewood, cost more. And then it was stuffed with duck feathers and foam. Um, The lounge chair came into production about the same time that Charles and Ray were building their house in the Pacific Palisades. And this was a joint process. The couple both understood their house as a kind of testing ground for all the works that they were producing through their office. And the interior of their home is filled with their designs. They really practiced what they preached. And interestingly, once they settled on a decor of a room, they kept with it and they would just keep it. They never changed their house around. They would basically replace things as they wore out, almost exactly the same. And if you notice, Ray wears the same outfit over and over, it's kind of a uniform she develops that she just liked and always wore, one less thing to worry about in the day. And here is their house. We can see in it Ray's love of rich color and fabrics. She had an extensive collection of textiles from Mexico and other funky, cherished objects. Ray was the recognized point person in interior design and a key stylist of all things, and of course was also very much involved in the design of the Eames house. Here is the exterior of the house as you can see it. It's basically exposed steel frame set with a series of panels with basic different transparent and opaque pieces of repeating glass throughout, creating this kind of grid-like form. They like these kind of very simple architectural elements that they would then fill with, their various interesting designs. She was very involved in this. This was a collaborative project. Like their house, the Eames also designed the Herman Miller showrooms. They did it with the same kind of minimal architectural framework. They wanted their interior arrangements to kind of take precedence, and they've kind of filled them with kind of all sorts of kind of interesting objects. They always kind of maintained a playful approach to these spaces. In 1959, they brought in the designer Alexander Girard into the fold, and he had a profound impact on the Eames. He was a textile manufacturer. He's so cool. He's kind of one of my favorite people of this whole world. Girard was an incredible colorist, grew up in a wealthy American family in Florence, Italy, and traveled the world as a young man. He moved to Detroit in 1939, and it's there that he met Charles and Ray, and Charles recruited him to join the Herman Miller Company and spearheaded their textile design unit. And he, like Ray, really favored bright colors, utilized a lot of kind of bold patterns in a very integrated and dynamic way. And he was with them through the 60s and 70s, really bringing, Eames' look with a kind of very colorful, playful sensibility. So while he's kind of working on that, that really frees up Charles and Ray to be more involved in filmmaking and exhibition design that were both real passions of Charles. They became particularly interested in cutting-edge technology in the presentation of information, leading them to create elaborate slideshows, films, and displays. And this interest culminated in 1975 with an exhibition called The World of Franklin and Jefferson. I don't know if any one of you remember or went to this. It was a massive mixed media exhibition done for the 200 bicentennial that was paid for by IBM and then kind of traveled around the United States. It was at the Met, was the inaugural. And it was incredibly comprehensive in scope and complex, presenting so many pieces of information. It drew from the National Gallery, from the Smithsonian, from museums around America. Just kind of almost an overwhelming amount of information. And ultimately, it was really too much and was widely criticized. But what's interesting is what they were trying to do was just so ahead of their time. They were trying to create like kind of almost like today, the way we experience museums, where we go up and we hit a button and information comes up on a computer, and we can kind of gives us contextualized information and kind of interactive experiences within a museum. And they're trying to do this kind of in a pre-digital period. They're really, really kind of avant la lettre in that, in thinking in these ways. The show was kind of considered to be, too kind of confusing, and was kind of, I think, kind of a good end point for them. Now, the later years of Charles and Ray are a little bit trickier to reconcile. Charles Eames had multiple affairs, which were very difficult for Ray. He was also invited by Harvard University to give a series of lectures called the Norton Series, where he used elaborate slideshows in his talks to really reflect all of the innovations of Eames that he had innovated, which was kind of annoying. But then again, these were different times, and as Ray herself said, "It isn't the same when I talked. Charles just had a way of putting things, and people would pay attention to him." In 1985, and then Charles ultimately dies shortly thereafter in 1975. Ray will live for another 10 years, continuing to run Eames Company in Venice for a while. Ultimately, she retired and lived in the Eames home alone. In 1985, she was invited to attend the World Design Conference to accept a prestigious award given to Charles posthumously. She went and graciously accepted the world's most influential design award on his behalf for work that they did together. And that is the story of Charles and Ray. But we know the real story, right? We know that she really was the co-designer of these works. There's a really good show on Charles and Ray by the American Masters series, which is on Amazon Prime. And I kind of want you to watch it. So I'm going to show you the trailer just to get you juiced up so you can go home and watch it to get more information.
We weren't sure quite what he was. Was he an architect? Was he a designer? Was he a filmmaker? But what he was, obviously, was something we all wanted to be.
She made paintings out of what she was surrounded by. Everything she touched, she turned into something magical.
For them, these names like painter and architect, they weren't job descriptions. They were ways of looking at the world.
Modern design was born from the marriage of art and industry. The Eames office was born from the marriage of Ray Kaiser, a painter who rarely painted, and Charles Eames, an architecture school dropout who never got his license.
They give shape to America's 20th century.
And it all began with a chair.
Had they just designed the furniture, they'd be in the Pantheon. It's the multifaceted nature of the career that is extraordinary.
For 4 decades, 901 Washington Boulevard in Venice Beach, California, was one of the most creative addresses on earth. Westinghouse, Boeing, and Polaroid all trusted the Eames office to solve their problems.
They wanted to work for the Google of their time, and they did.
They were introducing people to look at the world differently. Life was fun, was work, was fun, was life.
Dozens of gifted young designers cut their teeth within the walls of the studio.
I walk in the Eames office, and it was like walking into a circus.
And I thought, I've come to work in Disneyland.
It was a career that defined what it means to be a designer. Perhaps the greatest Eames design of all was the image of Charles and Ray. Together, they would become one of the great success stories of the post-war era.
Okay, so that's your homework to watch that, and yeah, that'll keep you busy until next time. We're going to talk about Nikki de Saint Phalle, another fascinating artist, and I'm going to try and save time so we can watch one of these videos together. I've been trying to do that every time, but I just go too far in my lecturing. But I'm going to try and hold back for next time. Thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you next week.